All right, folks, it's been quite a while since I've done a video. Apologies for my voice. I'm still recovering from a little bit of a sickness this week, but I've been meaning to get at least a very quick video on some books that have come in over the past few months that I'd love to share with you. Maybe encourage you to consider getting a few of them to add to your own library as you consider good resources for ministry and Christian life. So given that there's so many I've received in the past few months, I'm being particular here on what I'm trying to share with you, and I'm going to try to be quick as well as about it just to kind of get you familiar with obviously what's out there. But there's some practical things that have come in, a variety of practical books that have come in that are helpful, a couple kind of reference-oriented books that have come in that are great, and then a little bit more of kind of some maybe a few kind of more academic texts that are good to consider if you want to take a deep dive into something that might be very useful for study. So we'll start with the most practical, of course. And again, these are not new books in the sense of recent publications. They might be republications or old books or books that have been around for a long time or reprints or whatever. It's just they're new for my library, books that I've received, so they're not new in any other way, really. There's a few that are new, actually, the publication, but most of these are just new in the sense of they're new for me. So first, I think I've got 4 or 5 practical books that have come my way. The first is a very short, wonderful little tract almost on the importance of the Sabbath day by the Scottish Presbyterian Robert Haldane, famous for his commentaries and his work in the Scottish Presbyterian movement, I think in the 19th century, if I remember, late 18th, early part of the 19th century. So Sanctification of the Sabbath, notice how short that sucker is right there, and a very helpful guidebook, I think, for those of you that need some helpful tracts to promote to people on the importance of the Sabbath day without being, full-fledged Sabbatarian or something like that, which I'm not. But I hold to the Westminster Confession view of it, which is the perpetuation of the Sabbath for eternity, into the actually eternity into the cessation of it, into the new heavens and the earth. But we need to have something that's very brief to teach people. And this might be a wonderful help. It's 60 pages long or so to offer to people to consider it, given the variety of views out there on the Sabbath. The majority being that it's not important anymore, and it certainly is for the Christian and the Christian life, and to show the anticipation for the new heavens and the new earth as well. So helpful little book there for you to consider. Secondly is a book that just came out, I believe, a few years ago, 2021, by Jonathan Williams, and I mean these are wonderful books like this, along with his Jonathan Williams book on the importance of Richard Baxter for catechetical instruction of both the family and the church. Obviously, he's one of the great pastoral guides for the Protestant educational philosophy of ministry and how to catechize the church as a whole. So a little book called The Practical Theology of Family Worship. And it goes through Richard Baxter's timeless kind of principles for encouraging the home in the catechism. So 120-page book, very, very simple. I think I got it for $3 from Reformation Heritage. Would encourage you to consider his methodology. And of course, he's got a little guidebook, a 52-question guidebook, I think, that Baxter does, not Jonathan Williams, but Baxter does, going through family catechism and catechetical practices. Again, the goal is using a faithful method. There's not a perfect method. There's faithful methods. And I think Baxter certainly provides us with one of those faithful methods of it. So Jonathan Williams' take on that. More of a theology book here, but John Beagle wrote a book recently, I think another fairly recent book, 2023, so last year, called Offering Embracing Christ. Notice the marrow theology of John Colquhoun. And John Colquhoun he has become in the last few years one of my go-tos as to the theology of the Protestant Presbyterian faith. And a fantastic Puritan, later on, kind of a later on a Puritan, kind of had the Puritan spirit about him in his application of the old paths to the faith. And he's just a brilliant pastor theologian that I want to emulate my own life more after, John Calhoun, that is. And this is a fantastic kind of distillation of his theology on offering and embracing Christ, on the freedom of the gospel, yet also on the importance of the law in the life. So John Beagle's work on John Calhoun, very helpful. I think I got this book for $8. Again, fantastic. So Calhoun, The Covenant of Grace, Saving Faith. I think both those were republished and reprinted again recently. The Law and the Gospel, the Treatise on the Law and the Gospel, which has been widely disseminated by Reformation heritage. One of my favorite books of Calhoun's is his Treatise on the Covenant of Works. It's a very powerful treatise as well. So many, many things that are very helpful of Calhoun. Another one is very, very brief here, is this little New Reformation catechism on human sexuality. And what we see here is kind of a Heidelberg Catechism methodology of the Gospel Reformation Network that has put together a very helpful guide of creation, fall, and restoration or reformation based upon the human sexuality crisis going on in culture, and that's been, coming into the churches for a long time, of course, but maybe now more than ever, it feels like. So I love the way that they do this, is that they break it down by questions, notice, and they work through kind of a creation, fall, redemption motif through the questions of human sexuality. It's a fantastic guide that I think is very, very helpful for Christians everywhere. Very, very helpful. So would encourage you to get that. It's a 2 or 3 page little booklet there. Also, The Way of Life by Charles Hodge, kind of a famous book on the Christian life, Christian theology, and the Christian living of theology of Charles Hodge, which I think is probably one of the classics, yet pretty neglected today. And Banner of Truth has a handsome edition, cloth-bound edition of The Way of Life. And I think it was written in 1841, if I remember correctly. Earlier in his life, 1841, I think. And it goes through the great truths of salvation and the great applications of that salvation. Very devotional, user-friendly way. In fact, I'm going to take our staff and our church through this book next spring. So would encourage you to get this. Maybe see if you could find it at a discount, because it's about $20-something, kind of expensive. Last 2 books, again, kind of an author, Richard Osmer, certainly not a super conservative Christian, as he teaches at Princeton, or taught at Princeton. I'm not sure if he's still living today. But this is for those that want to have more of a healthy philosophy of education, how to teach, kind of more the practice of teaching. He wrote a number of books called the Teachable Spirit, Teaching for Faith, and Teaching in Classrooms, and a very, very kind of helpful collection on educational philosophy. So again, kind of distance ourselves a little bit from his institution, as he's taught at practical theology at Princeton Seminary, of all places, which is a highly liberal school. But the philosophy of education that he has, I think, is very helpful, in the way that the methodology of doing education, very helpful for teaching in the classroom, especially in the discipleship classrooms of the church. Another practical book got, again, a fairly popular book that came out, I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, is, of course, the book by 2021, by Reformed Baptist and very important voice in the churches today, Voddie Baucham, Fault Lines. Very important book, I think, for just on the practical level of pushing back against the very liberalized agenda of what's the loosely termed wokeism of today, and really getting back to, look, contextualizing the gospel is important. Sometimes we need to understand just to say no, that is unbiblical. And we have to learn to do both. We can't just learn to react. We have to learn to be constructive in how we respond. But sometimes we also need to know how to just simply say no. Very, very important for us to learn that these kind of ideologies are very secular, very anti-faith. And I think Dr. I don't know if Vadi has a doctorate or not, but Vadi is just really important voice in this area and should be read here, I think. As for some other books that might be helpful, a couple, again, not too long on this, just a couple thoughts is a little bit more academic here, and then we'll end with some references, is Vern Poythress has written a lot of books on the Trinity in the last few years. He's a fantastic theologian, and sometimes his books are a little challenging to read, I think. His one of his magnum opus, maybe the magnum opus he's written is The Mystery of the Trinity, and that came out 2 or 3 years ago, and it's a fantastic book, going through just chapter after chapter on the importance of the Trinity. And it's got even like user guides at the end on questions to review with classes, but it's still pretty heady and pretty challenging. And I really liked this. I think it's a little bit of a distillation of the book. It's not an abridgment, but a distillation of the book. But it's kind of a follow-up, as Dr. Edgar says in his recommendations, a follow-up to the splendid mystery of the Trinity. It's called Making Sense of the World. It's kind of an application of his book, I think, into how to view all of life through a Trinitarian, meaning scriptural lens of who God is. So how the Trinity helps to explain reality is the subtitle there. I got the book for maybe on sale for about $8. So again, what a handsome book, right? And not a small one, but not big, but pretty cheap and really helpful to make the Trinity more and more practical to how we view reality and live in reality by faith, okay? But also disseminate the reality of the Trinity to people in the pew. Very important for us to be able to do that as we educate laity, as we teach unbelievers the reality of who God is. I was teaching from 2 Thessalonians 1 this week about how people that go to hell, the wicked, he says the number one reason, because they do not know God. They do not know God, meaning they do not know God, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. So therefore, it's so important for us to be able to engage with people with who God is and who He's not. And this is a fantastic resource. I think Dr. Poythress is just really second to none in just his voluminous output and just his faithfulness to Scripture and really his practical ways of engaging lay people in these very challenging truths of biblical insight. Okay, so great book, Making Sense of the World. And then kind of certainly not a very practical book, but really interesting book that I'd love to dive into when I get some time. Finally was able to afford it because I found it for about, $5-10. Brand new, almost not used at all library copy of this book called The Holy Baptism of Blood and Fire, the Bible and the American Civil War. So a very interesting work of history and kind of biblical genre in that way by James Bird. He's kind of a famous religious chair of history at Vanderbilt. So certainly not a conservative institution by any stretch, but he's an historian and good to read. An interesting take. Kind of become a very popular book, even for how academic it is. A Holy Baptism of Blood and Fire. Looking forward to reading this and seeing the Bible's integration and intersection with the American Civil War. And then lastly, 3 reference books. I'll be very quick here. First, if you've not gotten any of the books by Meredith Kline, you need to. You should start with most likely Kingdom Prologue, though he's got other books that are shorter, or Images of the Spirit, very challenging book of images of the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament. But if you want something a lot easier than those 2 books, they're very challenging. And Oath Consigned is also very hard. This book on Harmageddon, these are all very hard books. You might get this book then, The Essential Writings of Meredith Kline, and really good introduction to him. And it's got an introduction by his son, a biographical sketch as well, I think by another son of his. So kind of a cool compendium of his writings, but kind of you get a taste of everything that he's teaching, but more of an introductory level as well. So the essential writings of Meredith G. Kline, introduced in kind of a sketch of his biography by his two sons, and a very important, one of the most important theologians in the Reformed tradition in the 20th century. So somebody to really consider. Also got Dr. Beeke. I don't know if it's his dissertation technically when he got his doctorate. Actually, no, I know it isn't, because that was his doctorate that he did in '88 on the assurance of salvation that he did on kind of the post-Reformation period. So this is just another book he did called Debated Issues in Divine or Sovereign Predestination that he did. And I cannot remember when he did this book particularly, but it went on sale a couple months ago. He did this in 2017. So historical theology on the debates surrounding divine sovereignty and predestination, on this doctrine, particular predestination, by Dr. Beeke. I think I got it on sale for like $15 or something. I think it's normally like $60. So kind of an incredible find there. And the two final ones, reference books. This one is the second volume, On Death, Part 2. Sounds like a movie series. On Death, Part 2 by Johann Gerhard. Probably one of the greatest post-Reformation, kind of second generation Lutheran theologians of Lutheran orthodoxy, known to man. He's well known in the Lutheran circles, but should be more well known in Reformation churches as a whole. And again, when you want to consult, what do the Lutheran scholars have to say about this doctrine or that doctrine? Of course, consult the Augsburg Confession, Formula of Concord, but you need to be consulting Johann Gerhard particularly. I typically do when I'm preparing for more of a theological teaching, whether it be a sermon or whether it be a class. I typically consult him or Chemnitz and the confession on what do Lutherans say particularly about this, without assuming anything. Obviously you want to consult Luther, but his works are more less systematic, more collections, a little harder to pin down exactly what does he say here. Is that just a phase he had, or so it's easier to kind of know what are the Orthodox perspective from the Lutheran perspective have to say when you consult the Formulas of Concord, the Augsburg Confession, and of course Johann Gerhard and Martin Chemnitz. Those are typically pretty good to stick with. Okay, so I got this. This is not on sale. This was $50. So, but pretty amazing reference book. Lastly, certainly not least, the Westminster Divine, George Gillespie, and undertaken by Naphtali Press. Chris, I think Coldwell, well known in publishing in Reformation studies and works of Reformation kind of antiquity, if we could call it like that. And he's been publishing all sorts of just profound republishing, retypesetting, editing, all sorts of I can only imagine how much work he has done with Naphtali Press and others to reproduce the works of George Gillespie, James Durham, and others through the funding of a number of donors through his work. And so look at this volume, the short or the shorter writings of George Gillespie, a divine of the Westminster Assembly, and it came out as 3 volumes. Got all 3 somewhere in the back there, but this is just really important writer, George Gillespie. And the first volume primarily, if I remember, covers a number of selected writings, particular writings, like I said, shorter writings, so kind of a grouping together of his more disparate kind of writings that they gathered together. The second, I believe, is more of his sustained writings on some different subjects, and that I think his last volume has to do with just his notes or comparison notes on the Westminster Assembly of various theologians on various issues. Kind of an interesting book for just reference if you're working through the Westminster Confession. So the 3-volume shorter writings of George Gillespie, an important Westminster divine. So that's my haul. Again, there's a lot of other books, but to make this video 20 minutes and to keep it to some level of sanity, I guess I gave you about 15 books there to consider for your library through a variety of things that you might want to be interested to teach, to investigate, to prayerfully consider. All right, hope this video finds well. If this station is of help to you, I encourage you to like and subscribe to the station as we aim to be a good godly resource of Christian literature, devotion, practice, and prayer. All right, signing off.